Friday, October 30th, 2020. Thank you for joining us today. We have another fantastic show planned for you in regard to our election special and the seemingly horrible planned chaos that's coming our way unless we do something about it. It's kind of an extension of the show from yesterday, or not yesterday, our last show that we did, or maybe it was yesterday. So many things going on that kind of tie in with this overarching discussion that we've been having. And as Whitney pointed out last time, that it's, not your typical election special. It's about what I would argue things that are really important, not the show that's going on around it all. But we're going to talk today about this network of shadowy, shady intelligence companies and all these people that work with them, tied with them, that are tied back to 9/11. As we just talked about, this is being framed as the new 9/11, and it's very, very relevant to this whole thing. We're going to touch on the more of the extension before of yesterday in regard to the hacks and the way that's being set up and framed and how it's all driving towards what Whitney has been uncovering. So let's get right into it. Whitney, how are you today?
I'm doing well, and I am ready to expose these losers who are clearly planning something awful. So with
Indeed.
that being said, let's just get into it. So we talked about Cyber Reason a lot yesterday, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. But, they put their most important advisors at the top, and we talked about the former CIA official. We talked about the former Unit 8200 commander and former Director General of the IDF and the former head of the Boston police at the time of the Boston Marathon bombing, who was involved with a lot of the doomsday predictions and simulation of Cyber Reason. But we did not talk about this guy, and I really think that it needs to change. So
David DeWalt here for people that are just maybe on the podcast version.
Yes, Dave DeWalt. Sorry about that. So Dave DeWalt is a member of Team 8. If you don't know what Team 8 is, it was funded by Eric Schmidt of Google, who is basically running the Pentagon's modernization policy. And it was set up by a former commander of Unit 8200 named Nadav Zafrir, who also has ties to the billionaire Paul Singer, among other people. And what do you know? It turns out that this guy, we're going to see this particular council coming up a lot with Barack Obama's national security or cybersecurity councils. A lot of these operatives in this network, they were there. Anyway, what's important here is that this guy was the CEO and executive chairman of FireEye and also of McAfee, which are going to be things that come up time and again. Here it notes that he's a board member at Team 8, Delta Airlines, and some of these other companies, but it doesn't mention that he is the vice chair of Cyber Reason's advisory board. They seemingly left Cyber Reason out, which I think is kind of odd. It's worth pointing out that on Team 8's board, well, these are some of their investors that we've seen in a lot of the companies and people that we were covering yesterday. Microsoft, Cisco, but also Walmart, Airbus, which has very deep ties to Palantir.
It's interesting the continual how these same entities continue to pop up in this same.
Yes.
It's very for people out there wondering that maybe they're just on the same project and it's all the same. These are things that are ostensibly, as far as the public is concerned, a lot of these are separate. But what Whitney is showing you is that they're really not, and that's what's so interesting. Is it stands out very on a surface by their ties, but people aren't looking into it.
Right. And again, we have SoftBank here. Remember, SoftBank is a major investor, the main investor in Cyber Reason, AT&T. They'll become important in a little bit. But also, if we go to their advisors, give it a second, we have the former director of the NSA here. What do you know? And also, deputy CISO at Walmart and Santander, one of the biggest banks in Europe, among other high-ranking people, all working for what has actually been described even in mainstream media press as like a front for Unit 8200 Team 8. By the way, there were actually a bunch of NSA officials that were really mad that Mike Rogers took a job here because they talked about how deeply tied Team 8 is to Israeli intelligence. So anyway, you have this guy, Mike Rogers. You also have Dave DeWalt, not just on Cyber Reason's board, but Team 8's board. And what other board is he on? Another Unit 8200 company called Clarity. And there he is again with Mike Rogers, who's the chairman of the board of advisors. So the former NSA director is here. Okay.
And when you mention this bi-national security state, that really screams that to me, the coordination between the two and these agendas they're working, it's interesting.
And Mike Rogers, who's essentially being paid by a foreign intelligence fronts, came out, was interviewed by NPR just recently saying, oh, I wish we'd done more against Russian meddling, then we wouldn't be in this horrible, chaotic election situation we're in now. If only we'd done more. Okay.
If only we've whittled that down to only 20,000 in memes on Facebook, we would have succeeded, you know? God.
Oh man, yeah, I know. So with that being said, I just wanted to point out because some of those connections with DeWalt and FireEye and McAfee will be important in a little bit. But I wanted to first really dive into an article I did for my site Unlimited Hangout at the end of August of this year, about the same time that Mike Rogers was warning that we didn't do enough about the Russians. Because one thing that a lot of people may have noticed recently is this claim that there's going to be an imminent, huge hack, probably a ransomware attack is how they're framing it, on hospitals throughout the US. Okay, so that's what makes this company, or not company, it's an organization tied to cybersecurity companies and Microsoft, who we talked a lot about yesterday. That is just, I mean, this is just so scandalous, and the fact that no one found this, well, I don't know. I mean, I found it, but didn't get a lot of attention, and I really think it should in light of this, what we're being told is going to be an imminent evil nation state that doesn't like the US or its freedoms attacking the US healthcare system. So as I pointed out here, over the past several months, again, this was a couple months ago, I wrote this, 80% of healthcare institutions in the US reported being targeted by some sort of cyber attack, ranging from minor to severe, including phishing attempts and spam. Okay, one of the reasons for the increase in success of this attack was the fact that lots of healthcare IT workers were working remotely, and a lot have been laid off or let go completely. As I point out here, a lot of that has to do with a direct policy enacted by the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, who we've talked a lot about in recent weeks and months, especially over, you know, because of the coronavirus stuff and warp speed and all of that stuff. And so there's also, and also there's been a lot of budget cuts, which have made a lot of these hospitals even more vulnerable. So they're, you know, in a situation where they have to do more with less. And conveniently, with this situation that was largely created, you know, by budget cuts or HHS itself, we have a ragtag group of cyber threat intelligence, or CTI, analysts with ties to the US government, Israeli intelligence, and Microsoft, who have volunteered to protect all these US healthcare institutions for free, and they've even directly partnered with the US government to do so, specifically a part of DHS that is in charge of protecting the critical infrastructure of the US, that is currently headed by a former top executive at Microsoft. Okay.
You know what I find most interesting about that is that you're talking about cuts in regards to things that they had previously been warning about. So that seems counterintuitive. But then when you find out that, as you pointed out, their actions set up the necessity for what they're rolling out now, it all kind of comes together. We need to see how these people plan these things out, problem, reaction, solution style, all the time.
Right. Well, it's something to keep in mind too. Eric Schmidt, right, who funded Team 8 and is on the National Security Commission for AI and wants the US to adopt all these AI things. He was saying not that long ago, I think it was before the coronavirus crisis anyway, that the biggest push for AI was going to come in the healthcare sector. So what better way to do that than to have some sort of cyber attack happen and be like, look at all these AI solutions we have that you need so there aren't any more nasty cyber attacks.
Right.
As you'll see, this is a recurring, it just becomes an increasingly likely possibility when you look at things like the CTI League, which we'll be going into here now. So calling themselves the cyber version of Justice League, the COVID-19 CTI League was created earlier this year in March. They described themselves as the first global volunteer emergency response community, defending and neutralizing cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities to the life-saving sectors related to the current COVID-19 pandemic. And they claim, at least in their most recent report, to have over 1,400 members from 76 different countries. But
How dare they take Justice League? How dare they do that?
I know. Look what they've done. Look what they've done. Anyway, that's their real crime, Ryan. Anyway, According to their website, CTI Leak says that they exist to protect medical organizations, public healthcare facilities, and emergency organizations from threats in the cyber domain. They offer their services for free to major hospitals, healthcare, and pharmaceutical companies, as well as U.S. law enforcement and federal agencies. Upon their creation, they sent an open letter to the healthcare community offering to volunteer their time and efforts to mitigate cyber threats and protect our healthcare system.
Nothing is ever free.
Oh, sorry.
Nothing is ever free. As I said, I believe when we mentioned, we talked about this on the show a while back, it's just, there's always a tit for tat, there's something that always comes around from these. And that's the same kind of lie they play with lobbyists in this country that, oh no, they're just giving money because they believe in the agenda. No, there's something that's going to come back from it. So that's, when I first read that, I just thought that's just so ridiculous that they're pretending to do this out of the goodness of their heart.
The people that set this up, as we'll see in a moment, are like high-ranking people at very ritzy cybersecurity firms or places like Microsoft. They make tons of money, and they're going to give their their services they can charge like hundreds of dollars an hour for to free because of COVID-19. I don't know. As we'll see in a moment, there are a lot of ulterior motives, and like always, make your own conclusions. But it doesn't look good. Anyway. Even though they frame themselves as being focused specifically on hospitals and healthcare institutions and pharmaceutical companies, they, if you actually look at their website, offer their services also for free to critical infrastructure systems throughout the US, including dams, nuclear reactors, and chemical plants. They're here to protect your healthcare and also your nuclear reactors. So that's nice. Anyway, this is particularly concerning given that there is no oversight regarding who can become a member of the CTI League, as you can join as soon as you're approved or vetted by any of the league's 4 founding members whose conflicts of interest and ties to US and Israeli national security states are pointed out later, and wait until you get a load of these guys. So basically you have to get vetted, approved by any of those 4 people, and then you're in. And by the way, CTI League's membership is entirely anonymous. No one knows who's in it, and they have over, as I said earlier, almost 1,500 members that are just hanging out in the critical infrastructure systems of the US, and also, hospitals and healthcare institutions and things like that.
So you're saying, the members are anonymous. You have to be approved by one of the members in order to get added, a founding member to get added to this, and it's all anonymous, and these people once added have access to our critical infrastructure. Why is that something that makes sense to anybody?
But they're doing it for free because they're clearly all altruistic, and they just love America, even though one of them isn't an American. The founding guy is Israeli, but they love America and they just want to protect our hospitals, Ryan.
Think about how invaluable the information is that they're holding on to, right? That's clearly something that it seems as a profit motive at the very least.
Yes. Yeah. Could it be used for corporate espionage, blackmail? I don't know. Who knows? I mean, they can get access to a lot of different information this way, but story for another day. What's worth pointing out too is that CTI League not only expanded to chemical plants and nuclear reactors, but also disinformation campaigns, helping stop the spread of, well, here it says it, the CTI League neutralizes any threat in the cyber domain regarding the current pandemic, which includes disinformation. Okay, so if you have questions, one of their disinformation campaigns was about who could have incited this First and Second Amendment rally in Texas. That was clearly the work of disinfo. It's not like Americans will get together to support their...
Yeah. How dare you protest for your constitutional right? Fake news.
It must have been the Russians, right? Just so clownish. Anyway, the CTI League works closely with HISAC, the Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, whose members include Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Merck, all of whom are developing Operation Warp Speed vaccine candidates. Also Amgen, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Athena Health, among others. HISAC's president works closely with DHS, and I believe she actually used to be part of DHS at one point.
That's another example of having the very entity like Google censoring on YouTube information about the vaccine when they work with Operation Warp Speed. These are entities that are working with the people that have the ability to attack information they claim is disinformation about their products. how incredible. The conflicts of interest are almost,
Right.
it just doesn't never, it never ends.
Another hack narrative, besides the hospitals being imminently hacked, right, is that foreign countries like China or whatever are trying to hack our U.S. vaccine research or U.S. pharmaceutical research, right? It's worth pointing out, as I'll point out later in the report, HISAC also, one of their members is also Gilead, the producer of remdesivir, which has been touted most of this year as a leading COVID-19 cure or therapeutic or whatever. So interesting to see all of those guys there, and CTI League is protecting them. So just another convenient narrative, I guess. Anyway,
I have just randomly, I've had this on the side for a minute, and I've just felt like it was an interesting thing to just kind of throw in there when it seems Gilead being mentioned. I thought this was kind of interesting that we're talking about a Gilead paying $178 million to doctors to promote drugs despite patients' deaths, right? It's so many examples of these things that you could You mentioned Johnson & Johnson numerous times, and yet these are the entities that are involved with our safety. I just continue to find that to be ridiculous.
Hey, well, Gilead used to be headed by Donald Rumsfeld, and he left to become George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense. So yeah, that company, among a lot of these other pharmaceutical companies, are really shady, but Gilead is extra shady. Anyway. So the CTI League also works with unspecified law enforcement partners in the US, and they work very closely with CISA, the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is overseen by DHS. The current CISA director, Christopher Krebs, this is actually not correct. He wasn't director of cybersecurity, or I think he may have been at one point director of cybersecurity at Microsoft, but right before he became head of CISA, he was in charge of Microsoft's relationship with the US government, was the VP for their government relations. And Microsoft's government contracts, of which there are many. So Christopher Krebs said in April that, he was saying, CISA is working around the clock with our public and private sector partners to combat this threat, meaning like COVID-19 crime or whatever. And, this includes longstanding partnerships and some new ones, like our partnership with the CTI League. And there's his tweet about it, talking about the CTI League. So this is also pretty interesting. Since CTI League began working with US authorities, they have taken increasingly to assigning blame to nation states, specifically Russia, China, and Iran, for various cyber intrusions, just as the US government began to do the same. In late April, for example, the Justice Department started saying that Chinese hackers planned to target US hospitals and labs to steal research related to the coronavirus. And anonymous US officials blamed China for a hack of HHS and COVID-19 research. No evidence tying China to the hacks was provided, and only anonymous government officials were willing to imply blame in statements given to the press, suggesting that there was not enough evidence to justify going public with the accusation or even open an official investigation against specific foreign entities. Because if they stay anonymous, that means they don't have enough evidence to actually prosecute it or do anything about it. It's just, we suspect, and as you'll see in this report, the way they justify blaming certain nation states, these cybersecurity professionals and government officials, it's really, there's not much there most of the time when they do this sort of thing.
Think about how crazy it is that they'll openly admit, as you pointed out in your report, that they are beginning to do the same, and by the way, have been doing the same, and that's not even a secret. And yet they're all up in arms about the hypothetical possibility that maybe that happened, and they can't prove it anyway. What about the fact that they just admitted that they did the very thing that they're freaking out about, right? Why is that not a discussion? They're breaking the law when they do that. Oh, but they're the good guys. Sorry, I forgot. It's so
they're
hypocritical.
Justice League. What are you talking about?
I forgot. They're all about justice. It's right in the name.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. All right. So anyway, just the same week, that US officials were blaming China for all of this stuff, CTI League's founder, Ohad Zaidenberg, claimed that China, Iran, and Russia are, quote, trying to steal everything. He was quoted in CBS News as their main expert in that article I linked to there, saying those three countries, quote, can steal information regarding the coronavirus, information they don't have, if they believe someone is creating a vaccine and they want to steal information about it, or they can use the pandemic as leverage so they can to steal any other type of information. So Zaidenberg, if you actually read his quotes and stuff, his English is not so good. So even then I had to sort of put in some things to make it sort of understandable, but I don't know why CBS didn't do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway. So pretty interesting that he's just going around on the news being like, they're stealing all the things,
No,
and
with
not
no
providing
evidence.
any evidence, just like, yes, they do steal everything. You are correct. Like, okay. Pretty
Journalism.
crazy.
Yeah.
Right. So who is Ohad Zadenberg? This guy is just, I mean, he and his company, they are out of control, as you will see in a second. So there's 4 founders of CTI League, but the idea and the key original founder was this guy, Zadenberg, who was previously an award-winning commander in Unit 8200. So many Unit
Jeez.
8200 commanders. I mean, it's just like, oh, they must be
Everywhere.
in a club or something after they leave, right? Anyway. While serving in Unit 8200, Zadenberg specialized in acts of cyber warfare targeting Iran and was at first began in Unit 8200 before becoming commander as a Persian language analyst. His current biography states that he continues to remain, quote, focused on Iran as a strategic intelligence target. And he describes himself as, quote, an authority in the operations of key Iranian APTs or advanced persistent threats. So the guy was a commander in Israeli intelligence where he focused on Iran the whole time, and then he left and now he's in the private sector, but he still focuses on Iran as a strategic intelligence target. And he is going around telling people Iran is stealing everything. Okay, let's believe him. Anyway, it gets worse though, because he didn't just leave the private sector. He's like the company he works for. Well, I mean, I'll just tell you, they're super tied up with the government still. So Zadenberg is the leading cyber intelligence researcher at a company called Clear Sky Cybersecurity, or just Clear Sky, an Israeli company directly partnered with Checkpoint and Verint, who we talked about yesterday, Verint being Converse Infosys, where Cyber Reasons, 2 of their co-founders used to work in Checkpoint. As we talked about yesterday in the video, if you go back and watch it, a former high-ranking guy in the IDF says Unit 8200 still influences what goes on at places like Checkpoint and Verint Inc. So
Not hard to see with Unit 8200 members seemingly at every position. It's just not hard to realize that.
Yeah. Anyway, beyond that, their partnerships with Checkpoint and Verint, Clear Sky collaborates daily with Elta Systems, an Israeli state-owned subsidiary of the state-owned weapons manufacturer Israel Aerospace Industries. And the founder of Clear Sky he actually created Israel's e-government platform. So government contractor. Zadenberg is also a researcher at the Tel Aviv-based Institute for National Security Studies, which focuses on national security and democracy in an era of post-truth and fake news. Anyway, that program where Zadenberg is working works directly with the Israeli government and the IDF, and it's currently headed by the former head of the IDF's Intelligence Analysis Division. So
Unbelievable. I mean, again, remember that regardless of being Israel itself, any other entity, any other countries, governments, intelligence community, or any level of it or part of it, having this much access to another country's infrastructure, critical infrastructure, is, I mean, I wouldn't say unprecedented. Who knows if it's been somewhere else, but this is not okay. And if it were Russia or somebody else likewise demonized, it would be outrageous. But because they just kind of painted Israel as the, untouchable, never discussed ally that never changes, despite all the things they've done to the U.S., it just gets ignored. It's just staggering to me.
Right. So like the main point here is that Israel, as I'll show after we get through this article, has essentially admitted that they want, before Trump leaves office, i.e. before January 2021, when a new president could be inaugurated in case Trump loses the election, they want to goad the U.S. into striking Iran first. And what better way to do that than to have some big cyber attack take place and be like, it was Iran. You should bomb them, right? Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. Don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but along that line, that's worth keeping in mind as I get into this next part. So Clear Sky and Zadenberg specifically are often cited by U.S. mainstream media outlets as the sole source for dubious claims that Iranian hackers have been responsible for a series of high-profile hacks and alleged disinformation campaigns. Let's believe them.
His entire job is about talking about things about Iran, and we're listening to him as the sole source about whether Iran's guilty.
Yeah,
That's just
no,
dumb.
I mean,
It's just
It's
stupid.
pretty, well, I mean, this dumbness, right? 100% facilitated by the mainstream media, as you'll see
Totally.
in a moment. I mean, just like, it's egregious. So in this one, there were a lot of examples. So in the interest of keeping this article not too long, I only referenced a couple. So in this one in Forbes, February 2018, it talked about Clear Sky's claims, citing only Zadenberg by name. So that article, if you go and read it, it says Clear Sky, Zadenberg, and then Clear Sky is an entity itself, and that's it, right? So they say an individual that they claim, Zadenberg claims is linked to Iran's government, was responsible for an Iranian propaganda machine targeting the BBC and producing fake news. Okay.
I love the
So,
link to Iran. That realistically could mean the janitor in the government building, right?
oh, just wait until you hear his explanation. I mean, it's pretty clownish. So Zadenberg said that this like propaganda machine, it sounds all scary, right? So there was some guy behind 3 fake news sites that like no one read. Again, like sort of like the Russian meddling Facebook memes, 25% of people didn't even see them, or like 25% of the memes they paid for were never seen. Anyway, the sites didn't publish actual fake news stories. They published criticisms of the BBC. So it's not really fake news. It was basically like an angry Iranian guy, like being like, BBC is imperialist bullshit. And
So expressing his opinions. Yeah. Oh, that's just not allowed.
yeah. But anyway, Zadenberg says the guy that had these sites, he's believed to have worked for Iran's National Ministry of Communications.
Well, that's sound.
He's believed, i.e. unconfirmed, to have worked perhaps for Iran's National Ministry of Communications in the past. Have worked, it's the past tense. So he's not currently working for them. Why he made those sites, and he's not even sure if he actually did work for them in the past. He might have. That's what all of this hinges on. So anyway, based on the Iranian nationals' believed work history, Zadenberg then says, quote, with medium to high certainty, this operation was funded by the Iranian government. Okay.
Which means you don't know, right?
Well, I mean, medium to high certainty, if you actually read these like attribution, when they attribute these hacks to like Russia, Iran, or China, you get crap like this all the time. Medium to high certainty that I'm right, meaning like 60%.
Yeah, it means you don't know, right? That's the thing. They just don't know how to say we don't know, right? They just can't do that. It's
right.
Medium to high certainty. Go ahead.
Well, the problem is that mainstream media leaves that medium to high certainty part for like the 9th paragraph or lower down in the article. And the headline is like, Iran is hacking us and they're making these horrible things. And it's like, I mean, clearly it's, the media is part of the op here, 100%.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Also, Forbes didn't mention the fact that Zadenberg admits to currently pursuing Iran as a strategic intelligence target and used to work for Unit 8200. They decided not to mention any of that stuff. Just, medium to high certainty, trust that guy. So right before the founding of CTI League, Zadenberg and Clear Sky were also the sole source of claims cited in the IB Times, this time that article, that Iranian hackers were exploiting VPN servers to plan to put back doors in companies around the world and target the US and Israeli governments. Just them, just trust Zadenberg and Clear Sky. They have no conflicts of interest. And again, they said, the hackers in question they're talking about, they say again, medium to high probability that it's Iranian because it's the activities they observed overlapped with the past activity of an unspecified Iranian offensive.
Wow, that's incredible. That's not even medium to high certainty. Now they're on probability, and that's not even medium to high probability.
I mean, do you see what's going on here? I mean, this is bad.
It really is.
Oh man.
This is I mean, this is not even journalistic in any sense at all. You are taking broad, undefined claims of people who have obvious conflicts of interest and using those sole things to drive very serious actions. And think about this, ladies and gentlemen, and we're talking about the past events we always mention, WMDs in Iraq and so on. How many of these things have been actually verified? Almost none of them. And I mean, and 9 times out of 10, as you're even clearly making the case here, they source back to the Israeli government. And they never even end up defining these things. And yet they continue to build, even though they're undefined, to some kind of an outcome like we saw the limpet mines, the whole back and forth with Iran. Those were all based on undefined allegations of medium to high certainty that were never, ever proven. How did we allow that to become the case as the American people? We need to ask ourselves that.
Right. And just think of the parallels between this and like saying Iraq has WMDs.
Right.
Right. Okay. And then they tried to blame the anthrax attacks. That those were Saddam's WMDs. That was a biological weapon he released. I mean, obviously that didn't go as planned, which is why they always tell you to remember 9/11, but never tell you to remember the 2001 anthrax attacks.
Right.
Funny how that works. But I mean, basically, I mean, what this is doing is that even though clearly their justification for blaming Iran is like, doesn't hold water at all. The idea is like, if a big cyber attack takes place and they call it the cyber 9/11 or something like that, you know, I mean, remember the day of 9/11, there were people on TV immediately being like, this appears to be the work of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, like right away before there could be the investigation, you know, but people were prepped before then to believe, oh yeah, well, wasn't there a news report a few months ago saying Osama bin Laden declared war on the US or something, or like issued an edict, you know, and all this stuff, right?
There's
So
been a
it's the
lot
same
of
crap.
really